Hi Bobcats, this is Miss Lee, and today's video lesson is on area of a rectangles. This is actually pretty much a review of what you've already learned in elementary school, but there are a couple of differences, so please make sure that you're taking good notes as you watch the video. Okay, so first, look at this formula for the area of a rectangle. It is capital A for area equals BH, where B is multiplied with H. Do you notice a difference between this formula and what you used in elementary? Sure, in elementary, you use the formula of length times width. Okay, we're still talking length and width, but in middle school, we changed the variables, the letters. Instead of L and W for length and width, we use the terms base and height, B and H. So the B represents the base, and the H is the height. So the base still describes the length. And with a rectangle, you'll notice that there are actually two bases. There's a top base and a bottom. I think of it like a ceiling and a floor because they're parallel to each other. So that's the length, and the height is the same thing as the width. But the height is how tall. How tall is the rectangle? Okay, so let's go ahead and label this down here on the formula chart for the rectangle. The base, you could do the top or the bottom, it doesn't matter. I usually do the bottom because I think of base and bottom, they both start with a B, but you could use the top. Sometimes the dimensions, you're given the base length on the top instead of on the bottom, but they're still the same length because it's a rectangle. Opposite sides are parallel, opposite sides are congruent. All angles are right angles. Okay. Then we have the square. Okay. The square actually has its own formula. You can still use area equals base times height, of course, but it also has its own formula. How are rectangles and squares different? They're the same, except all of the sides of a square are equal, right? They're congruent. So if I think of this as the side length being an S, then I could say that the area is S times S, right? Let me write it here. Area is going to be one side length times the other, and we learned this year that repeated multiplication can be written with an exponent. So the area that you can use for the square, you could use area equals the side squared. Now honestly, I don't really do that. I just stick with base times height. You know, do what you want to do. It's good to know this, but it's not a formula that you have to use. You can stick with base times height. Okay, let's do a couple examples. A rectangular tabletop has a length of 6 feet. Make sure you're annotating your word problems, and a width of 3.5 feet. A lot of times it's going to help draw a picture. So I'm just going to draw a rectangle and label the dimensions. The length is the same thing as your base, so that's going to be 6 feet. And the width is the same thing as your height, so that's the 3.5 feet. Okay, first thing you want to do is always write the formula. It is so easy with these area problems to use the wrong formula. You get caught up, and when there's a lot of different shapes, you get caught up using one formula and you end up using that formula for everything, and which is going to give you the wrong answers. So make sure you're writing the formula. Capital A, it's always a capital A for area, equals BH, which means you're multiplying the base times the height. Then we're going to write an equation. We're going to rewrite the formula and substitute numbers for the variables. Do I know the area? No, so the A stays an A. But I do know the base. The base is 6 feet, and I know the height is 3.5 feet. And we're multiplying them together. So there is your equation to find the area of this rectangle. And then solve it. Two different ways you could solve it. One way is keep it as a fraction. When you're multiplying with fractions, whole numbers have to be written in fraction form by putting it over 1 times mixed numbers, turn them into improper fractions. This becomes 7/2. Multiply the numerators together, multiply the denominators together, and simplify. So the area is going to be 21, but you have to include the labels, right? Feet, and area is always squared. because it's two-dimensional. You're multiplying two dimensions together, so you have to square it. So the area would be 21 feet squared. The other way you can multiply is you could say, okay, you know what? I'm not dealing with fractions. I'm going to turn this into a decimal. And you could say, okay, this is going to be 6 times 3.5 would be 3.5. And then do the math. Remove your decimal, multiply 35 times 6. You get 210. Count the decimal digits. You only need 1. So insert your decimal point, and you still get 21, just like we did over here. So you still get the same answer. Okay, next one. Mrs. Donald wants to cover the entire area of the bulletin board in her classroom with construction paper. The height is 15 inches, and it has an area of 180 square feet. What is the base length of the bulletin board? Okay, so this time we're kind of given a picture, so I'm going to use it to put my dimensions. What do I know? I know the height is 15. So here's my height over here. It's 15 inches. I know the area is 180 square feet. Oh, that's funny. I didn't notice that. These have two different dimensions. One is inches, one is feet. We'll just pick one. I'll stick with the inches, I guess. The area is 180. Remember, area is the inside of the shape. So area equals 180. What we don't know is the base. That's what we're looking for. That's our B. So write the formula. Area equals base times height. Plug in your numbers. This time we can replace the A with 180. I don't know the base, so it's going to stay at B, and the height is 15. So there is our equation. Let's solve it. We learned how to solve one-step equations. We have to isolate the variable, get the B by itself. It's being multiplied by 15, so we have to do the inverse operation of multiplication, which means to divide. So we're going to divide by 15. What you do to one side of the equation, you have to do to the other side. So do the math. 180 divided by 15 gives you 12. 15 divided by 15 is 1 times B, which is 1B, or just B. So B equals 12. So the base is going to equal 12, and I'm just going to use inches. It's not squared because it's not the area we're looking for. We're just looking for the one-dimension base length. So 12 inches is your answer. Okay, great job, Bobcats.